I am fascinated by the way the human body is both personal and universal. As my body, it is specific, imperfect. But as the body, it is an object, part of a cultural ideal. For 10 years, I worked with the female nude as a timeless symbol of beauty. I contrasted the fragile, absent figure with an opulent cast dress to explore the tension between private and public space, exposing the personal layer under these sumptuous expressions of culture. As I made these sculptures, I became aware that my visual vocabulary was myopic, wholly informed by Western aesthetics and ideals. I became captivated with the idea that at their core, clothing and bodies are neutral, without inherent meaning, and if viewed through a different cultural lens, they would appear completely differently. I decided to test my theory by going to Japan. After working with the rich drapery of Western dress, the kimono appeared austere. It fascinated me as the anti-dress. In 2007, I began a 7-month research fellowship through the Japan-US Friendship Commission. I lived in Kyoto, in the traditional kimono-making district of Nishijin, which hummed with the sound of kimono production. I studied all aspects of the craft, and I loved it. From dyeing the silk to weaving the fabric and drawing the imagery, it was a completely amazing experience. I was taken under the wings of people devoted to traditional methods. I immersed myself in the culture of the kimono, which involved, among other things, joining my new friends on Friday nights for lessons washed down with glass after glass of shochu. In all cultures, clothing is an unspoken language, but the kimono is perhaps the most codified. Every element of its design, the imagery, the sleeve length, the obi type, and the way it's tied, is highly significant. Putting on a kimono is assuming a role in society, a role proclaimed by the language of the kimono. In place of the West's preoccupation with the self, the Japanese idea of beauty is focused on the idea of a greater group. When a woman puts on a kimono, she must create a cylinder, the ideal shape to display the imagery. Her defining curves are eliminated through padding and binding. Her specific body is irrelevant. The beauty of the clothing supersedes the beauty of its wearer. Once I was back in my studio, I grappled with the concept of non-individual beauty. Instead of the absent body I had worked with in the past, I was now faced with one which had been erased, incorporated into a greater group, a body more significant than any single individual. Eventually, I found insight in Mu, the Buddhist notion of emptiness. Mu is not a variant of the Western nihilistic nothingness. Instead, it is the empty sky which contains the universe. With this in mind, I started working with biometric data from NASA and fabricated a precise mannequin of the median 40-year-old woman, an average every woman or an exact no woman, a female representation of Mu. As I started dressing my every woman, I realized more than ever how fluent I was in the Western vernacular of opulence and drapes, and how the Japanese expression of beauty was the radical departure I had hoped for. It was extremely challenging. I began to work in a spare and minimalistic way. I became more attentive to materials. Thinking of the kimono as a vessel for an erased body, I worked with clay for its humility, bronze for its tradition, rust for its transience, and glass because it embodies the contradiction of presence and absence. I found that my thinking parallels the aesthetic philosophy wabi-sabi, which is centered on the celebration of impermanence and prizes imperfection, asymmetry, simplicity, and the marks of time. I found particular kinship in kintsugi, where broken objects are repaired with gold, leaving scars visible and highly valued. From the beginning, I worked with kintsugi by intentionally drying ceramic in a way that caused cracks. Once, a kiln error caused the temperature to skyrocket, and 3 sculptures inside exploded. It was an opportunity for an extreme repair. I gathered all the pieces of unglazed terracotta and spent months putting them back together. I spent a total of 8 years building the whole body of work I call Floating World. It is a translation of Yukio, the name of the pleasure quarters in Edo, Japan, filled with geisha, maiko, and kabuki actors, floating above mundane existence. It is a world that was made famous by the ukiyo-e woodblock prints. It is these images of exotic beauty which influenced the 19th century avant-garde in Europe and the United States and gave birth to Japonisme. But what intrigued me most was the Japanese homophone for ukiyo, meaning sorrowful world. This is the earthly plane of death and rebirth from which Buddhists seek release. Even the name of the pleasure quarters, where people go to forget everyday worries and indulge in bodily gratification, uses a language that tempers beauty with an awareness of impermanence.